Chapter 354, Tarnished Prince. We assumed you would slowly understand our world, but since you asked, we shall tell you about the Goliaths. The chief alchemist began, his voice deep as he was about to reveal one of Patan's ancient stories. The Goliaths were less than 2% of the total number of our race, and we were over 5.7 billion at our peak. But before us were these Goliaths, one of the first men to walk the world. They were a race of towering beings, giants, 15 to 20 feet tall, sometimes more, never less. The chief alchemist began. They were masters of the bow, the origin of archery, and peerless at it even as other Patan races began to use the bow. One eventful day, something fell out of their queen. She might have been embarrassed, thinking it was waste, but alas, it was a child, a tiny, unrecognizable thing. Godfrey frowned. The chief alchemist continued. It was a fetus, not fully formed, but this wasn't a fetus. It was an actual baby. Not even malnourishment could explain this child. And worse, his eyesight was impaired. Godfrey shut his eyes and sighed. That was Ballista's origin story, the tarnished prince, unfavored from birth. Small and scrawny, he grew in a hostile terrain. He was a Goliath born small, an anomaly of the worst version. While the arrows of his kind dreamed of the clouds, he couldn't even pull a bow. He couldn't even see the incredible sight of when his father shot down a dragon with one arrow because of his bad eyesight. Eventually, he was thrown away from the prince born without hope, branded as tarnished. The moment the chief alchemist paused, all of them continued from where he stopped, speaking in unity. We did not see potential in him, but his raw determination proved us wrong. So when the process for the royal apostles began, he was selected. But instead of aiding him, the mana tree's sap gave him the ability to be invisible and destroyed what was left of his vision, making him completely blind. Others grew in size, became enormous banks of mana linked to us, but he shrunk in mass until his bones stuck out. We thought the Goliaths were not wrong and delegated him to train our archers. They paused, then continued. You might judge us, but while compassion is good, the fate of Pathani was in the hands of 10 men, the future of billions, not just one. We had to use what worked, and since he was good with the bow, delegating him to train the best of the land was the greatest honor a tarnished could get. Ballista refused to give up. He wanted to stand before the unknown king more than any of the knights back then. He wanted to prove that even a tarnished man could beat the odds, and so he trained like a relentless beast. His devotion caught our attention once more, and later on, so did his strength. We allowed him to join the process for the noble knight selection, and he succeeded. But what we used for him wasn't a chimera but a primal. We were afraid it would fail, but the Orc Esper possessed one of the best innate skills for a primal, one that would be extremely useful for an army. The chief alchemist interlocked his fingers. He's the most competitive amongst them all. His driven spirit made the others develop the urge to grow. Godfrey recalled how Mountain suddenly wanted to prove himself against Ballista when he had just summoned the second knight. His eyes flickered. The bladed crown must have been a representation of Ballista's tarnished nature. But there was a change. His helmet is different now, and he has an incarnation of himself as a Goliath, Godfrey responded. The chief alchemist was silent for a while. From what we told you, you already know that's not our doing. This is shocking, but we've noticed changes that were not our doing. The order has changed. To better frame this, the Golden Order has been transformed into a perfect hierarchical system. This is the mana tree's doing. It has optimized the potential of the noble knights in an ascending order, in a way that favors you, the summoner, while reducing us into a system. The mana tree uses the concept of mana, life, and fate in its work. The unknown king's presence proves that, and the future path of the noble knights we drafted, it made real. There are consequences, though. 1. The knights are fused to their armor. 2. Because of the order, knights like Mountain are capped at tiers much weaker than their peak. The chief alchemist leaned back. However, with what the mana tree has done to the order, once fully restored, It would be 100 times more glorious than our previous peak. This is undoubtedly good for us if you live long enough to gather all the noble knights. Perks of being a chosen one, huh? Godfrey muttered. So the mana tree gave Ballista an incarnation, what he would have truly been. With that ridiculous 3 boost, he's overwhelming anything in his tier. If I think about it, the alchemist said the Goliaths could shoot down dragons. 3 doesn't seem so outrageous anymore. That aside, they mentioned the Royal Apostles process and the Noble Knight process. The Royal Apostles were definitely the alchemist's support and bodyguards, but the king didn't have any bodyguards. The king's guards doesn't sound that bad. He would have to leave that for another day. It was just a stray thought. Godfrey returned to his throne room and sat on the throne. The symbiosis skill gave him a great amount of boost from Ballista. He had risen to 40, the absolute peak of the titled God tier, meaning his chances of surviving this ruination had risen to at least 75%. Besides, Isolde told him that once her dragons hatched and began to hunt, she would skyrocket in tier points since her domain was now a living world where she gained all the returns. Well, this increase would undoubtedly keep him ahead of her. It was time to test his strength and ballistas in a dungeon. He felt safer now, like a man who just got the biggest pay of his life and just felt like indulging. A tall, elegant woman walked into a small, dark room and sat before a round table. A man sat opposite her. I heard this is an assembly of titled gods who don't want to join guilds or work for the authorities. Why not work for me? Your freedom will be guaranteed, the woman said. Bold talk. Who are you exactly? Another titled god who thinks she's a ruler-class god and wants subordinate gods to boss around. The man scowled. The woman raised an eyebrow. I am Anya Bane, head of the most powerful family in Manhattan and this entire region, and I've come with some personal grudges which will benefit you and me. She tossed 2 pictures on the table. One was Isaac, and it had a target symbol. The other was Godfrey, with a billion written above it. You're not serious, the man said when he saw Godfrey's face. You fear a man whose highest feat is killing a paragon. Based on current analysis, that gate in Beijing isn't even in the 50 most dangerous dungeons. And you're a team of titled gods that just killed a formidable titled god in a Green Gate dungeon. Who's stronger? Chapter 355, Returning to the Mansion. After leaving his soul space, Godfrey had to leave for the mansion. He considered moving the orphanage to Pendragon Island, but that would ruin the old man's desire to be isolated from the world. Dragons danced in the skis of Pendragon Island. Dragon officers moved about with wyverns. There were a lot of people with summons there, with games that featured summoners using their summons. The world these orphans were used to wasn't the same as his own. Out there, summons dominated the screens. There were wrestling matches between summons, but this wasn't the harmful aspect. It was the propaganda of hate between beast summoners and humanoid summoners that wasn't just on screens, but in the minds of the public. Paradise might be better, but after knowing Gabriel was just Cain with a different personality, Paradise lost all its appeal. His parents were only there to deceive him into being relaxed. Godfrey wasn't sure it would work, though. That was why his parents had set up a mechanism that would teleport them straight to the Pendragon Mansion the moment there was an attack. He also placed a knight there so he could quickly use exchange in case. For some reason, he couldn't teleport over there. But the old man was adamant about remaining where he already was. He had been here for several decades already and wasn't planning on leaving. In the end, Godfrey could only leave a squad of great bow knights. All 10 of them hid their presence. Even while they guarded the compound, no one could notice them or even perceive their aura. He also left an Origin Tier Crimson Touty cavalryman. This soldier was the first cavalryman to gain the strength of an Origin Tier amongst the 50,000 Crimson Touty soldiers. With him and the bow knights, the orphanage was relatively secure. He was certain because, after asking questions, no other child had a parent, so no more Miquelas. He appeared in the room where the piano was. After looking around, Godfrey slid his hands into his pockets and walked toward the door. "I'm quite hungry." He patted his stomach, opened the door, and stepped out. His eyes went to Isaac, who was heading in his direction, most likely toward the sitting room. "You're back," Isaac smiled. "Lucy left. We still don't know where Snow went. Where did you go?" "To an orphanage," Godfrey replied. "Oh," Isaac tilted his head. That was not what he expected. Shocked. "I am. What took you there?" Isaac asked, genuinely curious. "My summon. Unfortunately, I had to witness a mother killing her child." Isaac was silent. "You're joking, right?" Godfrey looked at him, turned, and began to walk toward the main sitting room. Isaac quickly followed him. "You're serious? Who did that?" "Miquela." "That woman. What did you do to?" "I killed her," Godfrey interjected, answering the question Isaac wanted to ask. He saw Isaac calm down before adding, "I also attended the little girl's funeral. She was a titled god." Isaac blinked several times. He couldn't believe his ears. Miquela killed her child, who was a titled god-tier summoner. How? Well, her summons factor was solely focused on recovery, just like my mother. She had just awakened and couldn't evolve toward gaining ground in other factors, Godfrey replied. "I hated Miquela, but this is just cruelty in its highest form. She's mad," Isaac muttered. "Just like John," Godfrey added. "He's going after Snow. Shouldn't we do something?" Godfrey shook his head. "I don't think he can kill Snow, not with what he's become. If they both meet, I can't determine the end, but unless John can counter Snow's illusion, he can't win. Let's say John can damage him. What if Snow puts himself in an illusion where he just keeps healing or where he can't die?" He squinted. "Snow isn't human anymore. We don't understand his anatomy. Will he die after his head is removed? If yes, then killing him will be less of a hurdle, but if not, then it might not be possible unless you have greater tier points. Who knows what else he can do now? I need to step up my game." Isaac clenched his fist. Godfrey stopped walking, turned, and looked at his friend. "Do so. You have the potential to grow really fast. It's only going to eat away your morality until you become a human walking beast. Every time you want to grow, other than using a core, you're going to have to battle your conscience over and over with every new target until, one day, your conscience is gone. Or you're going to have to choose those you take their memories from wisely, those you think deserve it." "But," Isaac looked away, "does anyone truly deserve it?" "Yes," Godfrey's firm reply stunned Isaac. "Many deserve it." "I see." Isaac clenched his fist. Godfrey turned, took one step and paused, then turned back. "Where is Isolde?" "I think she has a meeting. She told me to inform you that the Guild Master of Gate Defenders Guild came in search of you." Isaac scratched the back of his head, smiling awkwardly. He had totally forgotten until Godfrey asked. Godfrey remembered Charles, Falco, and Lotus when he met them with Percival. Wait, did he actually miss Percival? Godfrey scoffed. Maybe he did. If he was the striker, Percival was the perfect defender he would also trust to have his back, to hold the fort while he charged toward their foe. That silent, blue-haired dude, just where had he gone? "She left a letter at her office for you. Guildmaster Johan wants you to join them and raid a Purple Gate dungeon. It's a titled god-tier dungeon." Isaac shivered. "He's insane." Godfrey squinted. "Purple Gates have dungeon cores like green gates, though. A core from a titled god boss and a dungeon core is double gain from just one raid. One core can bring Tempest and Toria closer to the titled god tier. That's a massive boost. The guild master wants the boss core, though. He's offering 200 million for it. Money and a dungeon core, which they don't know about, you don't say. Where did you say that letter is?" There were tremendous risks to a Purple Gate, but the reward was also immense. Risk was always part of the game. He could only prepare enough and face it regardless. Chapter 356. Was he mad? After 2 days of attending to things he deemed important, Godfrey arrived at Queen's City and descended from a taxi. He wore a simple gray hoodie, blue jeans, and white sneakers, with a backpack slung over his shoulder, carrying supplies he might need should this Purple Gate dungeon have time dilation. Holding the handle of his backpack with one hand, he made his way toward the heavily guarded bridge. Johann and the rest of his team were on the bridge with their trucks bearing the guild symbol of a shield. Falco, who sat in the driver's seat with the door open, turned his head and saw the hooded individual approaching the bridge. "Is that him?" he asked. Charles and Johann turned, while Lotus, who sat cross-legged on the top of the truck, sprang to her feet. Seeing him, she waved both hands. "Is she waving at me?" Godfrey muttered before lifting one hand and bringing it back down. At least that would let these agents know that he was with the team. They were already glaring at him with hostility. Other members of the team, all 20 of them, turned to Godfrey when they saw Lotus' reaction. One of them, standing beside another vehicle, folded his arms. "Is that truly Lotus? I've not seen her act like this at all." Hearing that, Philip, who had been nonchalant, also looked, then raised an eyebrow. He had lots of questions about this raid, but after the guild master told them about a summoner who would be able to guarantee their victory, he decided to wait and see who this person was. After that, he would decide. Someone hit his shoulder lightly, pulling Philip out of his thoughts. "Look at the guy she's waving at. She hasn't even given you a glance despite being one of the strongest members of the guild, but look at how she's reacting to that dude. She definitely doesn't like you," Philip's friend said. Philip replied with a scoff. "That dude, don't you know who that is? I'd watch my mouth if I were you," another member of the team close to them said. Philip and his friend raised an eyebrow. They watched their guild master, Charles, Falco, and Lotus approach Godfrey at the barricade. "Who's he?" Philip asked. "You don't know about him. That man, at 16, slaughtered 300 policemen. It was said that they were slammed by a sudden force that tore them apart, and there were marks of hooves on the road and their vehicles. We know it's one of his summons, the one they call the Death Rider, and he had that at 16. The man close to his 26th year whispered to them." Philip frowned. "Sounds like he should be rotting in jail." "That's why you should watch your mouth. He's the Golden Knight Summoner, the one whose knights gave that dragon a thrashing," the man added, forcing Philip's eyes to widen. "Him, that's the Golden Knight Summoner. The same dude with enough summons to rival a huge guild like ours," Philip's friend gasped. Philip blinked, then chuckled. "What rubbish!" He scoffed inwardly, saw Godfrey heading toward them with the guild master and the others, before turning to the duo beside him. "You want me to believe that he, that one man within my sight, has over 10,000 summons? Do you even hear yourself?" Philip scowled, but it dawned on him in the next second when he saw the expressions his friend and the other guy had as they stared at him. It was like they were staring at a man who had just come out of the woods. "He has more," his friend said. What?" Philip stuttered. Before his current status, he was just a construction worker without a certificate. He only bothered with a phone to call his mother. They didn't even have a television, and he didn't care about what wouldn't put food on his table. But that aside, even if he didn't have much knowledge, people that had 4 or 5 summons were myths, so rare they might not be over 1,000 of them in the entire world. Even if only 10 million people were left on Earth, 1,000 quad summoners or higher were still rare. Compared to the reality where there were billions on Earth, the rarity of such summoners was off the charts. In fact, to many, they didn't even exist at all. So how could one man, just one summoner, unleash over 10,000 summons? It just doesn't make sense. No matter how he thought about it, that couldn't be real. It just could. His strength doesn't make him our friend, though. He's strong, but his motives are questionable. The authorities have displayed reasons for his supposed helpful actions. And they're just to his benefit, and their reasons are quite valid to me. He hasn't debunked any of them either, Philip's friend said with a grim look and a grave tone. Why? Godfrey asked himself inwardly. He wasn't close to the trio, but he heard that last sentence. It wasn't exactly a whisper. Maybe that man didn't realize he was listening, and that was why he asked this simple question. Why? Why were they like this? His motives are questionable. Weren't they here because in the end they would get paid? Were they doing charitable work? No, of course not. But when it involves someone stronger, someone bigger, they demand what isn't theirs. I'm supposed to be a saint to explain everything to you. How many people did you explain to? Typical. People always want to tear down those bigger and belittle those lesser. They want equality, yet at the same time they want to be better. Godfrey paused. Wait, he blinked. All these things he was saying, something within him was fracturing. His humanity, if he wasn't careful, might be gone, but did he really want to belong to these kinds of people? Godfrey, just breathe, don't generalize. The orphanage is different, paradise wasn't bad either. So this is the team, he heard Johan speaking. Godfrey nodded, then interrupted. I actually wanted to ask if you could let me clear this dungeon alone. We spoke about this earlier, just have to put up a show here as well. What? Philip's eyes widened to the core when he heard that insane statement. He wasn't the only one. Everyone that heard it reeled. They were talking about a titled God-tier purple gate with an unknown terrain and time frame. Was he mad? No way, Charles retorted. Do I have to remind you that you're Celine Pendragon's partner? We don't want to be on the receiving side of a dragon's rage, especially one said to be the mother of dragons, Falco added. Lotus nodded, staring at Godfrey with concern. As long as we have the core, Johan said. Deal. Before the others could explode, Johan drew them, including Philip, to a corner. He won't die. Once the portal appears today, he'll go in, and once it appears tomorrow, we'll join him. If his knights aren't enough for whatever is in there, we aren't either. Thank God, the proud fool has saved me. If he dies, it's his fault. Well, I'll feel a little bad since his knights helped me. Let's hope he survives long enough to leave that. Philip's eyes widened at the last second. Once someone enters a purple gate, it won't appear again until they're dead or it has been cleared. Lotus said what came to Philip's mind. Johan's eyes widened. He should have thought this through. Well, he usually delegated Falco for tasks like this. He was an expert in reasonable excuses. What was he going to say now? Just then, the purple gate appeared on the other end of the bridge, on the Queen City side. It's all right. There's no way he can. Philip stared like someone about to faint when Godfrey took one step, vanished, and reappeared before the gate. With the second step, he was in. Johan and the others dashed toward it. When they got close, the gate closed before any of them could go through. Johan sighed in relief inwardly, but externally looked shocked to his core. Philip, who didn't move, shrugged. You can't help those who don't want to be helped, he muttered. Want to bet if he survives? His friend asked. Philip's eyes brightened. He might still make money out of this. No risk, great returns. Now this was what he liked. While Lotus and the others thought Godfrey had just jumped into what could lead to his own death, he found himself in a red desert. The sun's heat was scorching, and it was like the sand itself were hot coals. He was here alone, the secret of the purple gate protected a bit longer, enough for him to benefit. This terrain was the worst anyone would ever expect, but what took him 2 days before he came here? Well, he visited John's family. A bright home with his father and mother. Chapter 357, The One Who Stands Before You. Before coming here, he went to John's home. Isolde had helped him track it, so he decided to pay a visit. What he saw was a bright home, John's father and his mother. Godfrey vividly remembered as he watched them move about in their home, while he watched from a roof opposite their home. So, John had people who would still care for him, who would still love him, yet he gave that up to tread this dark path. Several times, Godfrey looked into himself, recalling his childhood dreams of being a hero like his father. He asked himself, was he a hero? Did he achieve his dream? The answer was an unfortunate no. A hero was someone with an unyielding resolve who stood on his ideals even when everything and everyone around him collapsed. That mindset, he didn't have it. This world broke him. It threw him into madness, but his loved ones kept him afloat. Their arms pushed him above the dark waters of madness. They brought back a smile to his face. But John had this too. Nothing justified him. Nothing. That ungrateful man had a family but chose to embrace the other side. John, I beg you to pray. Pray that I don't find you before snow does, because I will keep clearing dungeons, growing stronger and stronger in one way or the other. No matter what Cain did to empower you, you better hope he does more. That's my advice. Godfrey's eyes narrowed. Because once we meet, it will be the worst day, either for you or me. Certainly, it won't be for me. I will do all that is necessary to make sure of that. He ascended a dune as the scorching breeze blew against him. The red sand stretched endlessly, and as the wind moved, sand was shifted, forming new dunes. In my darkness, I still protect people, I still clear dungeons. Yet this world, my own race sees me in the worst light possible. I know they're manipulated, but is the public just that blind? With all that hate, I still persist, not for them, not for those ungrateful people who can't see, but for myself. It hurts when people twist what you do, especially when there were times I truly wanted to save lives. It didn't last, and that made things even worse. He rose to the top of the dune. But I'll keep going, for those I care about and those in miserable positions scattered around the world. I also came from a miserable beginning, where even my presence brought problems to my own mother. My fate is already tied to earth. I must fight if I am to grow. He stood at the top of the dune. His hoodie fell back due to the strong breeze, and his golden hair fluttered. There is nothing that can be done now. One day when I'm weak, those hiding and waiting will emerge. The manhwa tree will either empower someone whose ambition is to kill me and be praised for it, and even if it doesn't, we humans have insatiable greed. Godfrey manifested a long sword, slowly cracking his neck. Killing me will grant them the biggest boost of their lives. That's one reason I can never give up. I will never cease until I am uncontainable, until I am beyond the known. That is my goal, and I won't stop. No, not even this purple gate will stop me. I shall chant this until the day my eyes close in death, or I have achieved my goal. His blackout eyes gleamed as he gazed at the army on the red plains below the dune. They were a few hundred meters away. What he saw was a legion of strange creatures waiting for their next prey. There were cars, the cars that had been caught earlier. These cars were ripped apart, with no remains of those within. These creatures were werewolves, but strange ones. They were at least 8 feet tall, with some reaching 12 feet. The odd thing about them was the single horn protruding from their heads, like a stag that had lost one of its horns. They had black fur with black and red bone plates that grew out of their bodies and formed armor. It reinforced their claws, forming gauntlets that gave them longer, thicker claws. They were a blend of fur and bone, like steel. These bone plates covered their digitigrade legs up to their thighs. They also reinforced their long, muscular arms. They pulsed with faint red light, yet the eyes of these black, obviously demon-possessed werewolves were an icy blue. Behind this legion of nearly 10,000 werewolves stood a much bigger werewolf. It had a long dragon tail, also covered with bone plates like massive scales, and it also had 2 long horns that went up, curved backwards like the crescent moon before tilting toward the sky once more. Those horns pulsed with soft red light. That existence right there was the boss, a chimera and most definitely a demigod monster. It grunted angrily. "When will you send enough?" Its blue eyes gleamed coldly. Godfrey frowned. It wanted them to come in droves so it would devour them. The flesh of a human was quite delectable to these creatures, so much that it wanted a great number of them to munch on. I know we humans can be quite infuriating, intolerable even, but I'm also a human and I won't allow this any longer. Enough was sent. You just haven't seen them yet, Godfrey replied. The boss grinned, revealing his fangs. Is that so? The one who stands before you is a general, a supreme general who has carved through so many that I lost count at 300,000, and you dare mock me. I see just one man. A glint shot past the werewolf's eyes. I must say that's a great number. You are one of a kind. Praising me won't save you, the werewolf interrupted with a much wider grin. It looked like a grin, but the boss was at its limit. Godfrey raised an eyebrow, dryly amused. Praise you? You're sorely mistaken. If I'm to introduce myself the way you did, then the one who stands before you, beast, is a king. Several radiant diagrams flared up, and his noble knights, 8 of them, emerged, cloaks fluttering as their golden armor gleamed. Chapter 358, Still Outnumbered. The immortal armor manifested, covering him from head to toe as he lifted his longsword and slowly rested it with a soft clink on his shoulder, protected by a crimson pauldron. Seeing Godfrey and his noble knights, the boss's eyes narrowed and it unleashed a fierce roar. Still outnumbered. He snarled as his legion burst forward. Some ran with their digitigrade legs, others went on all fours, their claws digging up large amounts of sand, so much that the boss was hidden behind a veil of red dust. Ballista. Godfrey glanced at his second knight from the corner of his eyes. Ballista gave a nod and summoned his incarnation. A huge, 19-foot-tall Goliath clad from head to toe in golden armor, with tassets at both sides of his waist above chainmail that formed a battle skirt, emerged. Dust and sand billowed as he appeared behind them, looming like a mountain forged into a man. He had a Corinthian-style helmet, but his eyes were hidden behind shadows. From the top of his head fell an unruly white plume like Dirge's plume, but his own was much bigger. Goliath's armor turned crimson as he activated blackout state, his massive cloak billowing. With a deep breath, he lifted a massive warbow taller than all of Godfrey's knights. As Goliath knocked an arrow and drew it, he grunted. A giant grunts to shoot that bow. What kind of damage would it deal? Godfrey asked himself as Goliath aimed higher and released the bow. He covered his eyes as sand burst outward. The arrow tore into the sky, made a clean curve and descended, not as one arrow, but as a rain of arrows. Each arrow was taller than a spear, with arrowheads like the blades of a short sword. Several arrows plunged down, skewering the werewolves, and by the time it stopped, 500 werewolves were dead or heavily injured. Still the werewolves charged on, growling furiously. It's your turn, Mountain. Godfrey's words had barely left his lips when Mountain had already jumped from the top of the dune. He soared into the air, 2 more arrows from Goliath swooshing past him and harvesting more lives as he descended like a missile. With a thunderous sound, Mountain landed on the sand, his shield planted deep into it. Thousands of werewolves were already upon him. Ballista summoned 5 archers, knowing what Mountain wanted. Mountain's eyes gleamed. He nodded, not facing back, but Ballista knew that nod was for him. In the next moment, over 2,000 heavy infantry, with their shields and spears, formed a wall, with Mountain at the heart of it. Over 1,500 of them formed the wall, while the other 500 hung their shields at their backs, picked up their spears, and began to assemble them. Runes glowed as 2 or 3 spears fused, one end to the other. Then they formed a line behind the shield-bearers. When the werewolves came, the long spears struck like vipers, tearing through their hard, sword-deflecting fur, ripping right through their flesh and bursting out of their backs. 2 knights held a spear, their strength linked to produce greater might. They would pull the spear backward and strike once more. The werewolves were barely able to reach the shield wall as they fell, slaughtered by a well-disciplined army with rune technology and battle experience honed over centuries. It didn't last long as some werewolves leaped onto the spears, covering the distance with great speed while others dodged. But as the first few tried leaping over the wall, a knight with golden lightning tendril wings, each thick and crackling, flew past them. His wings wrapped around their bodies, electrocuting them until only bones remained, as he crashed on the sand before the shield wall. Tempest flung his double-bladed greatsword, and like a Beyblade, it spun around with the pull rune activated. Werewolves were dragged towards it despite their resistance, only to be sliced apart. When the greatsword came back to his hand, Tempest slammed it into the ground, channeled a great amount of mana, and activated pull once more. The red sand trembled. Sand and werewolves alike were pulled toward the blade, hundreds of them. Toria flew above Tempest, her massive wings spread out. The flames caught the werewolves, their howls dying quickly as they burned until only incomplete bones remained. Smoke billowed from the bones, drifting upward like incense, welcoming Toria's arrival. Her wings blasted a large amount of sand as her ironclad boots reached the ground. A huge werewolf lunged toward her, claws gleaming as it flew at her. Toria dug her boots into the sand, drew her rapier, and positioned it. The werewolf met the rapier. It was unfortunate, as the rapier stabbed right through its chest, and Toria lifted the huge wolf into the air. It dangled above her, blood sliding down her rapier. Toria noticed more wolves enclosing her in a semicircle. She threw the dead werewolf off, and her rapier transformed into a whip. As her hand went up, her legs widened for a proper stance. She could remember being in a snowy forest, surrounded by hounds. That was where she learned this move. No words, no grunt, no scream, just awareness and response. That was the knight she was trained to be. She could feel the joint at her shoulder adjusting quickly to this move as mana coursed. There was a slight ache as her arm stretched to the limit of her shoulder, but it was worth it. For this move was called the beheader. She swung the whip and it flashed like nothing happened. The werewolves were still running toward her, but their heads were rolling on the sand as blood spurted from their necks. They eventually collapsed and were set ablaze. But this was a battlefield. The enemies were not finished. A werewolf 12 feet tall, possibly a paragon, took advantage of that moment. Right as that whip did its work, the werewolf closed in, running on all fours before lunging like a wolf that had finally outsmarted its prey. Something whooshed past Toria and impaled the werewolf. It was Tempest's spear. It pierced through the werewolf's skull. Toria turned and saw Tempest flying toward her with great speed. She stretched her hand, and he grabbed it, spun several times midair and launched her. She traveled like a missile, burning all she passed before crashing where the wolves were more thickly populated. The moment she crashed, blue flame petals opened up like a rose blossom. It was beautiful, with a crimson knight with massive wings at the core. But this mesmerizing sight on this vast, endless red desert burned werewolves until they were ash. Chapter 359. Remember this name more. Toria turned and saw Dirge a good distance away from her. She casually tossed the werewolves away with slight movements of her fingers. Some had their arms ripped off or their heads severed by unseen forces. Her telekinesis made her a nightmare. As she tossed them into the air, Ballista and his incarnation's arrows would meet them midair. Dirge's plume waved as she moved elegantly, slapping these monsters off her path. Then she stopped, wrapped both hands around her staff and lifted it up. The moment no telekinetic force held these wolves anymore, they swarmed Dirge from all sides, their growls enough to paralyze a man with fear. With each inch the staff rose, the werewolves grew closer and closer until they lunged, claws and fangs inches away from her face. Right at that moment, Dirge activated blackout state and transformed into a banshee. Half her body became like smoke as she unleashed an ear-piercing screech that rippled out like the shockwave of a nuclear bomb. Her screech, though restrained, destroyed everything around her. The monsters were the first to burst apart before the desert followed. Sand flew outward with such speed it was able to make the other werewolves feel pain. They howled, growling at the banshee in the red fog whose bright eyes gazed at them. Suddenly, silhouettes emerged from the ground, thousands of them with glowing eyes. One, larger than the others, howled and ran on all fours, heading for the fog. Others followed, but the Crimson Towdy Shadow Wraith cavalrymen charged out of the fog with a dragon above them. As both sides were about to clash, Dirge unleashed another screech, but this one wasn't as cataclysmic, neither did it possess any ear-numbing effect. However, crimson mist burst out of her Shadow Wraith army. She had used an adaptive skill called Banshee's Grace. Then both sides clashed. Dying didn't matter to the Shadow Wraiths as they would reform again, but one slash was all it took to cut down a wolf, and it would remain dead permanently. On the other hand, Lysander cut through a tide of beasts, leaving cold corpses behind. Something moved a few feet away. It moved like thunder given flesh, the Death Rider. If he were an angel, he would be the evil angel, the representative of death. The Lamenting Knight. Lament, riding his steed, slaughtered the wolves like he was harvesting from a farm. With each crescent swing, 2 or most times 3, wolves would fall. Solstice didn't even unleash his weapons. He unleashed a large amount of flames from both hands, like a human flamethrower. The fire was so hot it turned the wolves to ash before they could even scream. None survived, even when they fled. After unleashing a massive amount of sunfire, he unleashed his swords and went straight for the others. He was the only one they were fleeing from. A werewolf saw him approach. Before it could lift its claws, its head fell to the ground as Solstice had already moved past it. A progenitor werewolf, perhaps the only one on the battlefield, grabbed a fleeing werewolf and crushed its neck. That action stopped the others in their tracks, forcing the werewolves to turn back, facing Solstice once more. Solstice stretched out both arms and approached them. The progenitor was the first to move. It burst forward and swung its claws at him. The blow was powerful enough to cause a massive gale that blew others away. Some small dunes lost a lot of sand due to the impact, yet Solstice stood there, blocking the blow with just one sword. His head tilt conveyed one sentence: was that all? This was who he was. Before becoming a knight, he was known far and wide as the Golden Boy. Arrogant, handsome, brave, charming enough to make the ladies clamor and the men wish they were born with his traits. Solstice sliced off the progenitor's arms, but it used grief transfer to distribute the damage, saving its arms. It closed in to rip his head off with its fangs, but the chief knight rammed his sword right through the monster's heart. Then the blade burst into flames as he swung upward, splitting the wolf's upper body into 2. Then he proceeded to grab its horn and fling it aside like garbage. He, Solstice, was the one who, before Mana came, when dragons were gods, went to the cave of one of the most dreadful of them all, looted it, and came back alive. He was the legend, a man with no equal. He once climbed the mountain said to belong to the most terrifying lion and baited it to fall off its own mountain to its death, then wore its pelt and declared himself lord of the mountains. He was a myth carved into a man, but the arrival of dungeons took it all. And his journey as a knight began, from a self-entitled man with lofty goals to an honorable knight with discipline. Solstice saw things that changed him, that took away his veil of invincibility and tempered this knight. He once served himself, never willing to bow his head, yet how was it that same man stayed when the order crumbled? Godfrey watched the battle in silence, his eyes on the boss who remained unmoving so far. He was bound to move soon. His legion was being decimated. At that moment, when Solstice brought down one of the strongest werewolves on the battlefield, The boss charged toward the chief knight and swung its claws, but Godfrey appeared and blocked the blow with his longsword. Cold blue eyes met black and gold ones, as a resounding clang echoed. You possess something unlike the mana system of your kind. You must be a chosen one, the boss growled. Then its other arm flickered upward, aiming to carve through Godfrey's entrails, but it ended up drawing sparks from Godfrey's armor. There wasn't a scratch. Heh, I see now. You are definitely the chosen one, it chuckled as they separated and began to walk in a circle. Then what? I am a chosen one. How does that bother you? Godfrey's voice rang from his helmet. The boss sharpened his claws against the other, drawing sparks as he grinned. Remember the name, Moore. This will be the first time I kill a chosen one. Then I shall present that armor to he who sent me. Moore declared. His eyes sharpened as Godfrey suddenly vanished and reappeared midair, almost behind him, his sword inching closer and closer to Moore's neck. Very well then. Chapter 360, Cracks in Space. Very well then. Godfrey's voice rang as he suppressed Moore with telekinesis, forcing the boss's body to remain stationary as he swung his sword. Although Moore couldn't move, he covered his entire body in armor and grew even more muscular. I might not be at the peak of my tier, but I can rival anyone in this tier because my defense can't be broken. I can't be killed, Moore roared in his mind. Godfrey's sword met his neck. It chipped in but couldn't go much deeper, yet that alone made Moore's eyes widen. You cut my armor, panic flashed in his eyes. If Godfrey could even nick his armor, then he was a threat that had to be brought down as fast as possible. And so, with all his might, Moore swung his head, aiming to drive his horns through Godfrey. Still midair, Godfrey let go of his sword and held onto those horns. Slashing wouldn't do much. Moore's armor was almost impervious to that. A thought flashed through his mind in this microsecond. Had the Gate Defenders Guild or any other team that didn't have at least 2 or 3 titled gods faced this, they would have been slaughtered. Still, it didn't mean much, since it was him. It's always a self-serving act when it was his doing. Well, maybe it was. Who cares anyway? His fingers clamped tight on Moore's horns. That forceful move was meant to either impale or launch him away, but holding onto the horns changed the outcome. His weight pulled Moore's head down as it wasn't expecting this move. That was it, all Godfrey needed. The moment his feet touched the sand, he slammed Moore's face into the ground and placed one foot on the back of the werewolf's head. I will remember this, he said. Moore went mad. He burst out of the sand with rage that almost turned his blue eyes red and clawed at Godfrey. His target dodged, again and again, forcing him into a frenzy. No one dared come close, as Moore's attacks were catastrophic to the surroundings. Come on, is this all a Supreme General can do? Godfrey said, somersaulting over Moore's head. It leaped, flinging its hand so it could grab his face, but Godfrey vanished at the last moment. I know this boss is strong, but it's still a beast with unmatched arrogance, like a lot of us. Arrogance is part of the package of being strong, but some have lost it. However, this one does back up his claim with his defense, which, to be honest, is not entirely its ability. An ancient god's existence granted it some kind of reinforcement that can block my slashes. Godfrey leaned back, watching Moore's claws graze the chainmail around his neck. It gave the boss the feeling it almost had him, just to miss him again. Moore might have formidable defenses, but he wasn't as fast. He wasn't thinking either, just relying on honed instinct like a beast. That wasn't bad, but Godfrey had come to understand, the higher you go, tactics and adaptability were key. He could try using his elements on his sword to pierce Moore, but that would cost a good chunk of mana he couldn't waste, since he was the source for all his knights, who were all fighting. As long as he wasn't certain that move would kill Moore, he couldn't use it. I've never thought of this. An idea flashed through his eyes, but Moore was already beyond his limit. It was desperate at this point. With great might, it swung down, and this time the sand exploded like there had been an explosion. A fierce gale blasted outward, sweeping everything kilometers away as a massive hole, kilometers long and wide, formed while red sand rose sky-high. Moore looked around and saw a slim silhouette not too far away. There was thick red fog everywhere, but Moore knew that was him. It had never hated anyone as much as it hated this human. Or was he a pest that just couldn't be killed? Moore was beyond anger as doubt settled in. Just what was this man? What? As he growled, Godfrey suddenly moved. One moment he was far away, the next he was close, and before Moore could react, Godfrey was right before him. Compared to the boss, Godfrey was relatively small. There were small blue constructs in his hand, needles made from Toria's flames. It took a lot of mental force and mana control to not just make these needles so intricately that they looked real, but to maintain them in this state. This was item materialization pushed to greater heights. It was one of the rare skills used from low tier to king tier back in the Age of Kings. A skill that Isolde pursued and had grown much stronger because of it. It didn't exactly suit his battle style since he already had weapons, but in cases like this, where thinking outside the box came into play, it was required. Using telekinesis, Godfrey launched the needles into Moore's eyes, and they went straight to his brain, burning him from the inside. Flames burst out from inside his head. Moore tried attacking but fell face first. Godfrey waved both hands, and the fog around them cleared, revealing both armies that were still fighting, although it was obvious he would win soon. His eyes went to the boss's corpse, watching as a core formed above it. One question popped up as he looked around. Where was the Purple Gate's core? He was certain Mountain found a dungeon core in that purple gate. Just then, 10 long bony claws dripping with blood tore through space, and grabbed it as if space itself were glass. Cracks began to appear on the fabric of reality itself. Something was forcing its way through. Was it an ancient god? An ominous voice rang. I see you, I know what you are, but do you know what I am? There was silence like it waited for him. I shall let you know. The cracks grew wider. I am your story, your future, your unfortunate fate. And the fabric of space shattered completely. Chapter 361, Damascus the Regent. The shattered fabric of space grew much wider, revealing a pair of small white eyes glowing from an eldritch plane. Come, child of the tree. At that moment, it shattered completely, revealing a massive doorframe with 2 horns at the top. What Godfrey saw on the other side of the door was a lichen, just 9 feet tall, in a foggy place with lots of weapons plunged into the ground and countless corpses that littered the landscape. This lichen stood on the other side of the door, with some bloodstains on its pitch-black fur. This beast had just finished an intense battle and was jumping right into another. It had exhausted itself already, yet gave off an oppressive aura that made Godfrey frown. It had long, lean legs, a flat stomach that almost caved in unnaturally, but its chest was wide and massive, with broad shoulders attached to long, slim arms that ended with terrifyingly long, clawed fingers. Blood coated the tips of this monster's claws. The lichen's head was heavily furred, with its eyes locked into that cunning and dreadful face. If it stood in a dark place with its eyes closed, no one would be able to spot it. Those soul-piercing eyes locked on Godfrey. Godfrey felt a foreboding, worse than anything he had ever faced. It almost felt like the existence before him would make Truthseeker a child in comparison. This might be his worst opponent yet. This secret boss had just finished a major fight, had exhausted a good amount of mana and stamina, yet decided to barge into another dungeon after slaughtering those that came to its own. Despite the fact that it would have exhausted a considerable amount of mana, Godfrey felt pressured, not by its strength, but by the skill of this creature. Moore was relatively easy, but what innate skill did this one have? It might not be related to something physical. I see a dead man walking. Your fate is inevitable and dire, but I shall grant you a swift death to ease your burden, Damascus declared. My fate is mine, Godfrey replied as he manifested a longsword and readied himself. His eyes were on Damascus, monitoring the boss with intensity. Once it made any movement, he would first use teleportation. And I wasn't asking. Damascus, the wolf demon's regent in charge of all demigods under its leader in all mature worlds, stepped out of the door and spread its hands wide. You can do nothing, King Godfrey, ruler of a fallen race. Your glory is in the past. The future, however, has no room for a ruler whose realm is barely habitable. When Damascus saw Godfrey's eyes meet his own, it chuckled. Godfrey's expression changed. That look the boss had got him, but how? Was there anything around him? No, there was nothing. It couldn't be. It was its eyes. Right at that moment, Godfrey's eyes became white. He became still, like his soul had left his body behind. Godfrey opened his eyes but found himself outside his parents' house. He stood on the street, staring at the door. What just happened? Where am I? Black smoke billowed out, forming the apparition of Damascus, who chuckled. You're in your future. This is your story, Godfrey Daniels. I made you to answer my question. That's the only reason you are special. That's the only reason I made you a chosen one. That voice. Godfrey was stunned to hear that, so he turned his head and saw himself with his mother, but her eyes were dull white as her irises vanished. That version of him, on the other hand, looked broken, like his whole world had crumbled and he could only watch in disbelief. His mother took a step closer, then caressed the cheeks of the future Godfrey, who was frozen. Succeed, and I will be glad. Fail, and you shall either be just another failure whose end is death, or Cain shall bring out your potential as you serve him as his summon. I have invested so much in this world to see another failure. I won't let you waste Patan either. Godfrey blinked. The pain of his future self was even worse, but he couldn't even think. One word, just one word, left his lips. What? Godfrey said, his voice low, soft, and filled with deep disbelief. There was no hate in her voice as she said those cruel words, no warmth either. Was this an illusion? When she removed her hand from his future self's cheek, her irises came back and Valentina blinked. It might rain soon. What are we still doing out here? Let's go, we're cooking together. She beamed, hurrying for the door. She walked past Godfrey, paused, and turned, only to see her son standing in that same place with a broken expression, his eyes moist as he looked at her. His mouth was slightly open, but no words came out. Godfrey looked at his future self and lowered his head. Sweetheart, what's wrong? Valentina couldn't finish as he turned and walked away. She chased after him, but Godfrey ran away from her, like a child scarred by his parents. He forgot all his powers, everything about him shattered like glass. He outran her and found a dark alley to hide himself. Godfrey followed his future self and saw him curled there, broken, lost. He clenched his teeth hard, forcing himself to hold it in, to hold the pain. Let me save you the pain, Damascus whispered. This is no fairy tale, it's no illusion, this is your future, your broken story. The scene changed. Godfrey had no clue how long had passed, but it wasn't that long, yet he saw himself on the streets of Manhattan, disintegrating, together with the immortal armor. He watched his future self turn to face the crying dragon flying toward him. His eyes met those of its rider. Isolde. It felt like he ceased to exist right before her eyes. You never survive the ruination. The creatures that come with those gates are not what you're used to facing. Even with everything you've done, you fail. Why don't you just sleep, O king? You've endured enough. You're just 19, yet the world shows no mercy. Let the embrace of death welcome you. Find solace in her embrace, Damascus whispered. Let it all come to an end. Die now and they will all lose, perish and gain peace. Rest is not in being uncontainable but in the embrace of death, in the journey after this life. It changed once more. Several scenes, red gates all over Earth, formidable creatures, and he eventually saw the afterlife world. So he died then. It was divided, with heaps of corpses on the black, desolate land. But in this darkness something stood out. A white knight with a winged helmet and a lance, riding a horse. He was like an angel in this dark world. His light shone bright. A noble knight. Yes, he shall guard your soul. End this, end your story, and let all this pain stop. Chapter 362, Mad King. While Godfrey was stuck in his future, Damascus made his way toward him, licking the blood off his claws. Standing right before Godfrey, he scraped his claws against the immortal armor. Remarkable relic, your mind is locked with your owner, you're growing attached. It pains you that you shall lose him soon. Your pain shall cease, for I shall be your new master. Damascus drew his hand back, about to plunge his claws into Godfrey, but an arrow was already before him. Damascus slapped Goliath's arrow off his path. You pesky summons, you're far from your peak, yet you fight to protect your king. Unfortunately, the lichen went for Godfrey. Killing him would bring down all the knights. But a knight was already beside him, swinging his twin swords at Damascus. It was Solstice, whose swords were on fire and his fierce glare burned like a blazing sun, but Damascus redirected his attack, plunging his claws through Solstice's chest plate. The chief knight grunted as he lowered his head to see the claws. How was it that a self-conceited man, who cared for nothing other than himself, would die for another? Ironic, wasn't it? Long live the king, he stuttered and slowly disintegrated into golden motes. That little time was all it took for the other noble knights. Tempest descended from above, aiming to pierce his spear right through Damascus, but the monster grabbed the spear, endured the lightning blast as he opened his other hand, readying his claws. He suddenly snapped to the other side and had to slap off Mountain's hammer axe, but that gave the huge knight the space to barrel into Damascus with his shield. The boss took a step back as he slid for a few meters. 6 arrows came at him and were shattered, but Lament was close. He leaped from his galloping horse, swinging his halberd downward, only for Damascus to grab the blade. His feet sank into the sand. With a growl, Damascus clawed open Lament's chest and watched the knight fall to one knee, grunting deeply. Still, Lament swung his halberd backward, and Damascus retaliated with an attack of his own. Tempest's tendril wings wrapped around that hand, dragging it, while Lysander appeared midair behind Damascus and swung his axe downward. The king must not die. He could not die, not under their watch, no matter who the foe was. Serve the king. The alchemist's voice rang in Lysander's mind. Toria knew her rapier would not work, so she turned it into a whip, wrapped it around the regent's neck, and pulled back with all her might. These knights, Damascus growled as Dirge's telekinesis fell on him, trying to force him to the ground. Lysander's axe slammed into his face. It wasn't able to cut it, but it slammed his head to the side. Damascus pulled his hand, snapping Tempest's shoulder. He grabbed the whip, pulled it, and slammed Toria so heavily the desert shook. Then he caught Lysander's face and clawed him repeatedly. Tempest shot a look at Mountain and Ballista, who were before Godfrey's stationary body, nodded at them. Then his wings shot forward like snakes and wrapped themselves around Damascus. The clouds thundered, and lightning descended, but before it hit the boss, the lightning vanished as motes of golden light from Tempest danced into the sky. Dirge launched tens of thousands of shadow wraiths, while Mountain tightened his grip around his shield and charged through their ranks. They were knights. Facing monsters was what they did. It was their duty. They were the angels of Patan, the terror of invaders. Besides, this wouldn't be the end. It was just another death. He could bear it. He could handle one more without going hollow. Faith, hope shall be his anchor. For the king, Mountains' roar echoed as he ran, faster toward his death. Ballista took Godfrey. He understood all these deaths would have taken a huge toll on Godfrey's mana. Summoning his falcon might not be wise. Dirge had to remain in range, so he took Godfrey and ran while Goliath remained behind. He had two bodies now. He could be both invisible and visible. Damascus tore through hundreds, thousands, growling as Goliath's arrows annoying. He couldn't use his skill on these knights. Their future was terrifying as long as they remained alive. Pathans never fell, they grew stronger and stronger, with more powerful knights emerging. With Godfrey, they would be a great danger to his liege. As he ripped through the wraiths, Mountain's hammer came at him once more. Damascus grabbed it and roared for the first time. "Enough! I will kill every last one of you, and then I will kill your king. Rip apart your future and—" The regent's eyes went to a dune, where he saw Godfrey with Ballista behind him. He had awakened. "Damascus!" Godfrey roared from the top of the dune, his voice bursting with raw, unbridled madness, not just from what he had seen in his future, but the slaughter of his summons broke whatever self-control he had. It wasn't just Dirge. Every wraith on the battlefield shuddered at the aura billowing out of Godfrey. All his cores were gone, just a small amount of mana remained. Godfrey's entire body trembled as he clenched his fists. The entire dune exploded as he shot forward. Right now, he wanted just one thing: death. Death. He drew his gauntleted fist backward and made a come gesture with the other. That sign, empowered by a telekinetic force, pulled Damascus toward him, then a fist met a face. It threw the regent back like a missile, tearing through several massive dunes, forcing them to crumble. There were shockwaves as Godfrey teleported, appeared above the lichen and slammed him down. A mighty sound rang when Damascus made contact with the sand. The entire desert shook. Godfrey slammed the earth, legs wide as he loomed above this creature, who swung his claws at Godfrey, but his claws bounced off the immortal armor. Now Godfrey was awake, so was the armor, and the lichen, as dangerous as it was, had a weak offense factor and more trick factor. Damascus might have used enough mana if he had not lost a chunk of it in the battle in his own dungeon, and if Godfrey's blows had not already disoriented him. Godfrey slammed his fist into the regent's face. Once wasn't enough, neither was twice. He kept throwing blows, each forcing the entire desert to quake, dunes to crumble as if the plain itself was a drum. Damascus clawed back in retaliation, both fighting with all they had. Godfrey manifested two swords, pinned Damascus' arms to the ground, and continued hammering the regent's face with his fists. It was until he lost his last drop of mana, and then stamina, that he stopped, arms limp at his sides as he fell on one knee. As Godfrey panted, the desert began to rumble from afar as something closed in. The sand parted as a massive sandworm emerged. It met a side glare from Godfrey, his eyes unable to gleam, yet shining like a madman's. A mad king. The sandworm turned away and vanished into the sand. What it saw, what it felt rather, was a warning. The message was clear: approach and I don't care how, but you will die. Chapter 363, Stronger Resolve. A huge humanoid white wolf clad in black armor, and a long mane dragged a slightly curved sword through a devastated terrain with destroyed mountains, rifts all over the ground which lots of trees had fallen into. Damascus is dead, the wolf growled. It could only wait for now, but soon, very soon, it shall seek out his regent's killer. While that ancient god resumed its activity, Godfrey remained on one knee, his head bent over as sweat trickled down in heavy drops, his eyes dull. He had always wondered why the strong were so different, so aloof in the perspective of the weak. Once upon a time he thought it was all about strength. Now he knew it was. Being stronger comes with its own burdens. You see things, feel things. The cruel reality the weak never saw is laid bare before your eyes. You either side with it or fight against it and risk being crushed. Strength didn't eliminate problems. Godfrey collapsed. Dirge, Ballista, and Goliath were gone the moment the last of his mana dried out. His eyes slowly narrowed as he gazed at the sun. The sun, isn't it supposed to be hot? Godfrey asked as he barely felt its heat. What Damascus had shown him was his future, that he died during the ruination stage. Meaning, in 2 months, maybe less, maybe more, death awaited. So why fight? Why continue if the future already says he dies? Was it weird that he missed those days in school where it was only about stomping down on those weaker, with shallow emotions? Godfrey knew this earlier, but it became clearer now. What occurred in Manhattan Summoner's High was the surface of the deep cruelty this world had festered into. They all came from parents who had already fed their doctrines to their children, into a school where the teachers were scared of what their parents could do. The weak had no one to back them, and when that cruelty had festered enough, they gained strength, maybe through the mana tree, and stomped on those that had once done the same. And so the cycle repeated. Few like him were beaten, physically and emotionally, until they became like the rest of the world. Maybe he should have remained a normal human, but was that even a choice? When his life had been planned from the beginning. It was like with each step of the way, any form of happiness was being ripped away from his being. The world seemed to take pleasure in his sadness. To ensure he descended into madness. Who knew the strong felt pain? Godfrey sat up. I guess they just flaunted their summons and skills and refused to tell us what they have to go through. All I saw back then was Isolde's powerful summons, not the torture she went through. Or maybe he couldn't call himself that. He couldn't call himself strong. Godfrey's resolve shook for the first time. Within him, he knew what Damascus revealed would soon come to pass. According to his fate, his existence would end in the ruination. Like countless other chosen ones and worlds, he would fail. It wasn't anything new, right? Godfrey laughed, his voice weak and hollow. What pained him so much? What hurt his heart so deeply? Was it his mother, or the fact that it had just been slapped right in his face that death awaited him no matter what? The old man was right. I guess those stronger feel greater pain. Maybe if I was weaker, I would have thought I'm not strong enough, but I'm already at the peak of the titled God tier, the peak of everything at this moment, and you're telling me I'm still helpless. He hung his head low. Chosen one. What a farce. Might as well call me the doomed fates one if all I'll be fed is that my future is dark and bleak. He scowled, eyes hardening. Then Godfrey rose to his feet, swaying from side to side. Is this world really this cruel, or is it just me? I once wanted to get stronger to protect my mother, but she's just the incarnation of the originator of all this. However, the mana tree took the form of a woman just to produce a child that she placed the burden of a centuries-old order on and would sacrifice to her favored one just to satisfy her goal. Even she lacked faith that he would achieve it and had better hopes with Cain. Of course, she merged the order with him. If it didn't work, she would merge him and the order with Cain. That was 2 chosen entities working for one favored one. How appealing. Barely 19, yet I feel like I've lived 100 years. My mind is heavy, the path to my goal grows darker, but my will can't be broken. I will grab onto it even in my dying breath. Even if I'm being ripped apart, my fingers shall never let go. I will still rise. I might as well carry that burden that gives others hope. Isn't that what the weight of the crown entails? 3 years. It's just been 3 years since he awakened, and his life was about to be snuffed out. Was death the only way? No. It was. These existences, Cain, the mana tree, and whatever god out there scheming and manipulating, all had strength, and their strength gave him pain. That told him all he needed to know. The journey to his destination might be extremely gruesome, but he would get there. No one had to believe in him. Their doubt and schemes didn't matter. So long as he saw a new day, his ambition would burn stronger. And maybe, just maybe, he would find what he sought at that place where no one had stepped in. Even with ragged breath, his eyes hardened with resolve. Godfrey refused to allow himself to break. All this pain he felt was metamorphosis. He was transforming into something. He was in the forge, under the blacksmith's merciless hammering and the unforgiving heat of the fire. Yes, his future said he would die in the ruination, but he knew about it now. A good chunk of information about the ruination was in his head. Godfrey had foreknowledge, and that knowledge meant advantage. It meant the future wasn't set in stone. As long as he planned, it could be changed. He fell on one knee, grabbed Damascus core, then saw a purple core gleaming under the sand a few meters away. Chapter 364. I've lost my humanity. Do you think he's already dead? Philip's friend asked him. Maybe he'll last a little longer, but he's not making it back alive. Philip, whose arms were crossed, replied firmly. What if he does? The guy who told them about Godfrey said. His voice drew Philip and his friend's attention. Both of them turned, looking at the guy with raised eyebrows. You don't even look certain, Philip snickered. Honestly, we're not even looking down on the guy here. We placed all his cards on the table and made a bet. You chose him clearing the dungeon, we said otherwise. A bet is a bet, don't even think of withdrawing. Philip's friend tapped the guy's shoulder. He's not surviving a purple gate. Tell me one person you've heard of that survived a purple gate of his own tier. And this purple gate is powerful enough to shut down phones, signals, and vehicles. How do you X? The man he was speaking to already regretted his bet. He had placed his bet because of Godfrey's past feats, his shock factor, but maybe he overhyped the whole thing. Maybe he. The guy's eyes suddenly went wide, and he brushed the arm of Philip's friend off his shoulder. The collective gasps of the others made Philip and his friend turn. A massive, swirling purple mass reflected in their eyes. The purple gate had appeared, and it wasn't too far from them. It's not been that long, is he already dead? Philip muttered. His eyes slowly widened until they reached their limit as the reflection of a silhouette behind the gate appeared in his irises. Before their eyes, Godfrey walked out of the purple gate. His hoodie was down, and his eyes were a striking shade of ocean blue, not the intimidating black sclera and golden irises. But those blue eyes lost their softness and became sharp, making those who stared at him feel the hairs on their bodies rise as a strange chill enveloped their skin. What happened in there? Johann thought as Godfrey approached him, brought out a titled God core from his bag and placed it in his hand. A deal's a deal. I suggest you absorb it fast and hide before you lose your head. News spreads fast, Godfrey whispered into Johann's left ear. He forced a smile at Lotus and Charles before walking away. I don't think he came out of that dungeon the same. Falco gazed at Godfrey's departing figure. Charles squinted. That means whatever he faced there would have wiped us out. Falco looked at Lotus, who was silent and pursed his lips. I heard we will all receive a boost after the ruination. I'm pretty sure my level might rise, but the question is, if a titled God dungeon is already this dangerous, do we have hope of surviving the ruination? He looked at Johann. We do. One day this darkness will clear and we shall see the sun. Johann clutched the core tight. Falco lowered his eyes to the core, then looked away and tucked his hands into his pockets. It's obvious he doesn't have mana. A powerful 19-year-old titled God summoner, one of the most infamous ones, is completely vulnerable at this moment. If we gather ourselves, killing him won't be a problem. Falco placed his hand at his mouth and cleared his throat. Even with that power, he's not invincible. He can die like any other human being, like me. While this went on in Falco's mind, Philip wasn't just shocked to the core. He was in a dilemma of losing a good amount of money. He promised he would double whatever was in that guy's account, and now. Philip clenched his teeth hard. He should probably quit betting. Godfrey arrived at the mansion after a while. On his way to his room, he passed Isolde's office. When he wrapped his fingers around the door's handle, his eyes flickered. "She's in Japan. I clearly read that she was at a meeting, yet I forgot." His eyes lingered on the door for a moment. Then he heard a sound on the other side. Godfrey slammed the door open and froze in the next second as he saw Arthur before one of the shelves on the highest floor. Arthur looked down. "You're back. I came to check on both of you. I guess it just dawned on me that my little girl isn't little any longer." Godfrey raised an eyebrow. That sounded a little too somber for the Arthur he knew, and what was that protruding from his head? Horns. He didn't think Arthur was the type that favored the use of echo to change his human features. Arthur descended, his hands tucked into the pockets of his trench coat. He noticed Godfrey's gaze, brought out his hands and stretched them. Godfrey noticed the claws too, and Arthur's eyes were different, like a dragon. "The man that stands before you has completely lost his humanity." Arthur drew closer, then stopped 4 meters away. The sunlight from the tall window behind the desk flooded the room, creating a dividing line between both of them. "How?" Arthur closed the gap, tapped Godfrey's shoulder and left the room. Godfrey followed him to the walkway as they both went toward the main living room. "Let's say I was convinced by Gwen." Godfrey frowned. Arthur chuckled, tucking his hands back into his pockets. "She had valid points. Selection of titled gods might as well be over. You know your limit in this world is what the mana tree decides for you, and it has decided I remain in the Age of Origins. And truly, I've been at the top for quite a while. Unfortunately, to continue my work, I couldn't remain weak. Gwen might not be trustworthy, but becoming a titled god has at least made me relevant. Although, if I had other choices, I wouldn't have chosen one that made me lose a dear friend." Godfrey knew Arthur meant his summon. It was like having a best friend for several decades and ending up killing him. "Then, how do you still sound so calm? When your wife almost died, you barely flinched. When Isolde died, you showed little emotion. How do you manage it?" Chapter 365, Rikers Island. Arthur glanced at Godfrey. "Did you know I was adopted into this family? My wife was born into it. I was quite young back then, but I still remember those days at the orphanage. I would make sure my peers got fed. It was already a battle for food due to our numbers and some kids that just wanted more. I comforted those around me with what little words and food I had. This man you see wasn't a stranger to starvation, not because I couldn't fight for food, but because I chose to give it out to those weaker." Arthur proceeded into the living room. "I fought off bullies. Most of them were older than me, so I usually got beaten to a pulp, groaning for minutes on the ground. At least they didn't hurt the others, I would tell myself." He sat down on a sofa, eyes flickering. That little boy wanted the pain to end with him because someone had to carry the pain for others to be happy. I cage my emotions because I am that anchor when they're down, solace when they cry. I chose this stance as a guardian, and I will die without regret." He looked at the silent Godfrey with a soft smile. "That's just how I grew up to become. You know, Cain wants to remove trust from this world from you. He inflicts pain and discord because he fears what trust can produce, what a united humanity might become." His eyes met Godfrey's blue eyes. "But in this world I will embrace trust." A warm smile appeared on his face. "Knowing I will be stabbed in the back again and again, and maybe one day die, but Cain will live dreading the man who refused to live by his rules. He will call me a fool, but then loathe this fool. All the days I shall draw breath, I will pave a path for my daughter and you." Arthur's bright smile, that peace on his face, confused Godfrey. "I know you feel pain. We at the top feel it the most. We face death more than others. Power comes with responsibility no matter how insensitive you are. It burdens you. Your pain might linger, but know you're bringing back hope and joy. One day you will rebuild the entirety of Patan, you will restore a world and bring happiness to it. Let the pain end with us. Godfrey sat on the sofa opposite him and looked at the ground, then exhaled loudly. I think I should visit my mother. Arthur raised an eyebrow. Godfrey lifted up his head. My mother is the incarnation of the manhwa tree. You see, I am an engineered product of that tree's mad quest. Arthur's facial muscles relaxed, as this was the kind of shock that silenced a great crowd. He stared at Godfrey for a good while, then leaned back. I guess it all makes sense now. I guess it does. Godfrey's flat response made Arthur focus on him. I don't think it was a pleasant revelation for you to know that manhwa itself is your mother, and all this, the apocalypse and everything else, is her doing. That's an understatement. She looked right into my eyes and told me if I fail, at least I would be of help to Cain as his summon. It doesn't matter how I die. She'll figure out a way to make me Cain's summon, probably by intercepting my soul and binding it to his soul space. Arthur frowned deeply. That was cruel for a mother to say that to her child. When did you meet her? I haven't, Godfrey replied. I was opportune to see what the future has for me. Then she's been pretending all this while, Arthur inquired. No, my mother, the woman who raised me, is still there. I think the manhwa tree allowed a personality to form, since all she wanted was for me to be born bearing Patan in my soul space. That aside, I have no idea why she would reveal herself. Arthur's eyes flickered when he heard that. Because she doesn't want you to fail. At least, she wants you to do your best to get stronger, but in the end, once you die, it still benefits Cain. Godfrey tilted his head, see. But she's still your mother. The personality that grew here loves you and will do her best to protect you, Arthur said softly. That body doesn't mean much to the manhwa tree since objectives have been achieved, and I don't think the manhwa tree has any need to harm her. It's only interested in you. I'm saying this so you don't just give your mother a cold shoulder. I support you going to meet her. Don't get isolated further, he added. Now I think you need updates on something. First, Sebastian is being moved to Rikers Island, which holds the most dangerous prisoners in the world. I looked into it, and according to the report, Sebastian might have lost his mind and slaughtered every single prisoner during yard time. They said he piled the bodies, along with that of the policemen who had access to their summons. Apparently, he also killed them, added their bodies to the pile, and sat on it. Arthur spoke with a grim tone. Godfrey frowned. Mastery, it might have been him who taught Paradise that skill. I should have known. They plan to put him under lockdown, making sure he won't be able to see anyone. Even in a prison with the worst kind of people all over the globe, he's considered the most dangerous, Arthur continued. Now I have no idea why he did that, for the fun of it or to throw us off. Whatever his reason was, I think he wanted to get to Rikers Island. Godfrey sighed. Going after Cain won't be wise. We don't know how far he has planned and his contingencies. You can't be right about him without solid facts. Chapter 366, titled God Night Summons. That's true. I'll watch for now, Arthur said, then cleared his throat. Godfrey raised an eyebrow. Was there another important bit of information he had to know? It appeared like it. Aside from Mrs. Athena, the others are still adamant that you join the authorities before they remove the bounty. They're sure now that, with a good number of titled gods and progenitors around, you have a huge red target mark on your back, Arthur said. There's also word about some objects called relics that can make a summoner invincible. They think you'll reconsider if you want to survive. Godfrey scoffed. Tell them to increase the bounty. 1 billion is too small for a demigod. It should be 10 billion, perhaps 100. I'm sure there'll be waves of people constantly hunting me down. I'll either be forced to join them or die. Arthur went silent for a moment, then smiled. You've changed. He rose to his feet. Tell Isolde I visited, and don't forget to take care of yourself. You're leaving. I've been here for a while, we've talked, and I'm certain you're both all right. Shortly after Arthur left, Godfrey went to his soul space and sat down on the throne. Now, it was time to use his rewards, he thought, looking at two cores. One was purple, the other was quite transparent. The purple one was the dungeon core, and the transparent diamond-shaped one was Damascus core, a 38.6 titled god whose ability could affect those with higher points. Not that Godfrey was surprised. He wasn't the first he had faced. It had been a while since he used a dungeon core. Godfrey had no clue which was more powerful, but he was willing to bet the purple gate was better. Tempest, Toria, his voice echoed. Two portals appeared and both Phoenix Knights emerged, took a few steps, and went on one knee. Once Toria rose, Tempest would swiftly follow, so Godfrey had to give her the core. This was the literal definition of killing two birds with one stone. Toria held the core and absorbed it. Her aura exploded, surging upward at a rapid pace. It swiftly broke into the progenitor tier and kept surging upward. Tempest's aura swiftly followed. Before Godfrey's eyes, his knights glowed with golden light. Their heights remained the same, Tempest being 12 feet tall and Toria 10, but all the scratches on their armor vanished, and it looked like they donned new armor when the glow died down. Both of them had risen to 32.5, just 1 point less to become titled God Summons. This felt so gratifying. He sent them back to their chamber, summoned Solstice, and gave him the dungeon core. A fierce gale exploded outward when Solstice absorbed the core. His height reached 14 feet. His arming swords might as well be a normal human's greatsword. Solstice didn't just look majestic. His tier rose from 26 to 34.1, breaking all his previous limits. Name: Chief General of the Golden Order, Dragon Knight. Type: Hybrid. Tier: 34.1, titled God. Potential: Unknown. Solstice's potential made Godfrey blink twice. Unknown. Was it because he didn't know the tier ranking of the ancient gods? If it was calculating ancient gods, then Solstice was something else. Now, he could grow alongside him without being blocked by a potential limit. This was the benefit of being classified as a chief general. Mountain got the other end of the stick for being the first noble knight he summoned and got stuck at King tier. Apparently, this was the Mana Tree's doing, lowering the first knights so they could be accessible. That, unfortunately, crippled Mountain, but he would find a way to restore him. Mountain, at his peak, was a demigod. His time was coming, but right now, Solstice could explore the abilities of his beast part to get stronger. Since, from what he saw, the full beast was locked within them, they could feel bits of its instincts, enabling them to flow properly when in blackout state. Solstice went on one knee. "Let's go to your tower. It's been a while since I refined my Patan knowledge from those wall texts," Godfrey said. "I do have the alchemists now, but I feel like reading and decoding things myself. Might take my mind off a lot of things." When he got to Solstice's tower, which was a massive hall with tall pillars that stretched to the lofty ceiling, he paused. This tower was about 3 to 4 stories tall if he were to use that as a measurement. The torches lit up, clearing away the darkness and revealing a massive image carved into the wall. There was a wall of text beside it, probably telling the story of what happened. Godfrey saw the sun high above, with a creature with vast wings, a dragon, descending from it, while countless Golden Order knights stood with their spears aimed skyward. The next scene was the battle, or, to be explicit, the massacre. Knights lay wasted, and the dragon, though wounded, was still alive. That dragon wasn't that big compared to the size of Isolde's biggest dragons. It was about 100 feet long, or maybe 120. Big, but nothing special for dragon kind. It looked big before, but with the full picture, not so much. Or was it a young dragon that did this much damage? If it was so powerful with this size, then this creature was truly terrifying. "I wanted to ask, are you affected by Isolde? You've never acted like it," Godfrey said as he looked down at where the dragon was finally killed. Though not clear, he could still make out the images in the last section. Mountain was there, so were Ballista and Tempest. It must have been a great campaign for 3 noble knights to move together along with their troops. I'm not affected by her because I'm not a dragon, your majesty. The sun dragon isn't from their race. It's called an absolute wondrous beings that were born at the dawn of life, before worlds were created. Our sun was created long before our world, and it is the first sun to be created, which is why the alchemists call it the origin sun. Within it was an embryo, which became the sun dragon. It had existed before the dragon race was created. Solstice's calm, deep voice echoed in the hall. Chapter 367, An Absolute. An absolute, Godfrey squinted. He knew of monarchs which had effects over their ecosystem and were treated like royalty by other creatures, but absolutes was a new term, and they sounded primordial. Beings that existed at the dawn of life. Didn't that mean when life began, these beings were already there? The emergence of mana sped up its growth, and it left the origin sun. It might have existed for eons as an embryo, but it was only a few years old both in body and consciousness when it descended, Solstice continued. He lifted his head, staring at the great beast at the top of this massive image fit for giants. Even for his current size, he was still little compared to the image etched into the wall. When mana first appeared, there were lots of changes. First, our beasts gained strange runes that gave them different abilities, but the day a beam of fire descended from the sun, I was nearly blinded. It was the origin sun reacting to mana, and it turned a great portion of our continent into what we called the scorched lands. Solstice folded his arms. It descended a few years later, weakened without the embrace of the sun but arrogant enough to think it could dominate. We, on the other hand, were waiting, sharpening our swords and skills with other dungeon monsters. He grunted softly. Eventually, we killed it, the beast that had caused the death of hundreds of millions even before it stepped foot on our world. A great number of my brothers fell, but our blades cut deep until it collapsed. While listening to Solstice, Godfrey went through the text which told the same story, though not as clearly. I've always been confident. I've dominated several beasts in their terrain before mana, and we have powerful beasts, but when I saw my comrades burnt to nothing, my eyes blurred. Pain was foreign to me. I was never close to other noble knights. I didn't want a personal troop because I was all for myself. I had the basic troops given to me to clear dungeons but didn't manage them as much. But every time I close my eyes, I recall how one of them pushed me off and was burnt in my stead. Solstice was quiet for a moment. And for the first time in my life, my eyes blurred not for myself but for another. A genuine hate and anger because of another. Solstice pointed at one of the smaller images where one knight stood in a field of corpses. Some places were just burnt land. The knights there were burnt to ash. My troops, they were gone for a general that never once cared, Solstice spoke, his voice low. He stood there, looking majestic and imposing, but spoke words that could make one see there was more to the one behind that armor. What is honor? You're not selfish. You just haven't found someone to break your walls. Truly, I wonder what a soul like you could become once he has found honor in being a knight and not just seeking its glory, Solstice recited. He told me that. Who? Godfrey asked. He who can't be named. Even before we had the false hearts, he was called the perfect knight. He was quite mysterious but was the best of us, yet I hated him for being better than me, Solstice responded calmly. Then why is he always called a taboo by the alchemists? Solstice looked at his king, pondered for a while, then decided to speak. Because the mana tree decided one day that Patan needed another chosen. It wanted a knight and an alchemist in one being. That decision made the perfect knight the mad one. Solstice turned back to the image. He became worse than a monster from a dungeon. The apostles are the buffer. They protect the alchemists, whose abilities allow them to tap into information across several worlds and perceive secrets of fate, life, death, mana, and concepts we can't even fathom. They're always a step away from madness. I see, Godfrey nodded slowly in realization. Why is he a taboo then? Because once his name is mentioned, his seal grows weaker, Solstice replied. The mana tree did not allow something like that to die in peace, but decided to put it in my castle. It does feel like a powerful knight, but even the alchemists keep their distance. They're as mysterious as it gets. Who knows what this knight is capable of? Godfrey went to another wall. His knights had gotten better, but there were still paragon cores and 2 progenitor cores available. He returned to his throne room, summoned Dirge and Lysander. Dirge used a progenitor core and rose to 28.9, while Lysander absorbed the paragon cores and the progenitor core before he was able to rise to 29.2. Both became progenitors. Now his 3rd knight, 5th knight, 6th knight, 7th knight, and 9th knight were all at least progenitor tier summons. If he included Isolde, who would have risen in tier as her dragons would have begun to emerge from their eggs, his manpower was formidable. That aside, his troops were around 100,000, excluding the units under his summons. While sitting silently on the throne, Godfrey suddenly thought of something. It just occurred to me. The alchemists said they counted me and Isolde as Earth's chosen ones. Are we the only 2? What about Percival? Is he a chosen, a favored, or a fortunate one? It's strange. I can't even be sure which one he is. Godfrey propped his chin with one hand. I'm sure he's not ordinary. Come to think of it, it's as if the mana tree selected all my friends, or our status was what brought all of us to the same place in the first place. Godfrey thought of the alchemists, the noble knights, the average Golden Order knights, the group of dragons they fought against. In one way or another, their selection had a way of drawing them to meet, either as allies or enemies. Percival might be a favored one, or does he have a mission like me and Isolde? I can't really tell. It will be a little better if he will be in paradise when I get there. Chapter 368, Trident of the Sea World. Rumble. The skies above a vast ocean rumbled. Although the clouds were dark and gloomy, the thunderbolts crackling through them would brighten them occasionally, and when lightning fell, the world would become bright for a split second. Droplets of water fell from the sky, smashing into the surface of the ocean. Despite the terrifying storm, a massive ship sailed through these troubled waters. Strangely, the ocean in a kilometer radius around this ship was completely calm, allowing the ship to sail peacefully. It's still raining. It's been days now. Ever since these orcs came to this world through that red gate, the sun vanishes wherever they go, the clouds haven't stopped rumbling. The ocean is uneasy. There are typhoons even at its depths and mighty waves at the surface. Nowhere is safe. A pale-skinned man squatted on a rock slightly above the ocean. The waves smashed against him, yet he remained there, clutching a golden trident firmly. His short blue hair, soaked, stuck to his head, but when the wave struck it shifted, sometimes obstructing his vision. I've brought down 4 ships. This will be the last for tonight. Kill the orcs, free the sea people, that's the objective, Percival said inwardly as he shut his eyes and took a deep breath. When he first came to this world, it felt so good. He could swim in the ocean for miles non-stop, searching for islands, since this world was made up of 95% water. Surging through the water like a missile, with his hair being whipped about, was exhilarating. So was evading dangerous monsters. There were lots of dungeons and monsters here, but he didn't see a need to fight and finally did what he loved to do. Unfortunately, the fight came to him, like it always did. Percival disliked fighting. He disliked being angry, but what choice did he have? "Levi, let's go," he said with gleaming eyes and jumped into the sea. A massive leviathan, almost a kilometer long or maybe more, Percival didn't know exactly, growled in response. Both of them shot through the ocean like bullets. By the time the orcs guarding the decks were able to raise their crossbows, Percival burst out of the water, shattering the crossbows with a sweep of his trident. "Levi, let's go," he said with gleaming eyes and jumped into the sea. A massive leviathan, almost a kilometer long or maybe more, Percival didn't know exactly, growled in response. Both of them shot through the ocean like bullets. By the time the orcs guarding the decks were able to raise their crossbows, Percival burst out of the water, shattering the crossbows with a sweep of his trident. Levi encircled the ship. It maintained a proper distance from them, waiting for those unfortunate ones that would be tossed into the water. 12 huge orcs with brown skin and heavy armor aimed their massive curved swords, made for hacking and slashing, at the blue-haired man, whose body was covered in light blue and golden scale-like armor. His eyes shone bright. Some orcs watched the Leviathan. Right at that moment, lightning struck, brightening up the world. That was the trigger. Percival burst forward, closing the gap between him and the first two orcs. All of a sudden, all that momentum went into his trident, which he swung in a circle. It spun and came for the orcs, slicing through their armor. As their blood sprayed, it mixed with the water droplets from the rain and Percival's trident. After that spin, he simply thrust the trident right through the throat of the next orc before the blood of the first two hit the ground. 1, 2, 3, 9 more to go. Bakavu Zishki. One of the orcs bellowed as all of them barreled toward him as one, closing in on him in a semicircular formation. These were clearly not the usual bloodlusted green-skinned orcs, but that didn't matter to Percival. He twirled the trident and slammed the bottom against the wooden floor. 9 water tentacles burst from the ocean, enveloped the orcs' heads, and lifted them into the air. They struggled, but it was meaningless. The Leviathan was already close. Percival went into the ship and found several dozen orcs, true orcs like the ones he faced above, but these ones had shields. Though they spoke in a language he couldn't understand, Percival knew they recognized him. They knew what he had done, how he had crippled most of their advances. These orcs assembled themselves, forming a shield wall, and began to advance slowly. Instead of charging blindly, they came as one, with a solid formation. This was why true orcs were feared. They were smart, not controlled by lust for blood and battle. Yet they had the strength and size of other orc kinds, although these orcs were still invasive and plundered. They were one of the most dangerous races, especially when against an entire horde. Watching these orcs approach, Percival lowered the tip of his trident to the wooden floor. "You're fighting me in the wrong place. Try land next time." He swung the trident upward, forcing a massive surge of water that burst through the wooden floor, blasting some orcs through the ceiling while the others fell into the ocean. As the ship sank, Percival dashed toward the huge door that was behind the orcs. It had to be where the sea people were kept. With a light grunt, he smashed the door open but found a small chamber where one orc sat on the ground, cross-legged. This was the wrong room, but this orc. It had a full gray beard and long hair. Each strand lay loosened as they draped on the floorboards. Even with the amount of water gushing into this chamber, this orc remained passive, eyes closed. Calm, too calm for an orc. Percival's eyes went to the trident resting on the orc's thighs. The orc had 4 rings on both tusks, a titled god. It was leagues ahead of him in terms of power. He had just ascended to the progenitor tier, and the trials he went through were immense. However, Percival wasn't afraid. The ocean spirit, the mana system of this world, was on his side. Right then, the orc opened its eyes and the ship blew apart. Percival found himself a few hundred meters away, slightly dizzy. He shook his head and lifted it. "What?" Percival frowned when he saw the orc floating in the sea, its long hair swaying gently. It scoffed softly, tightened its grip around the trident, and before Percival's eyes, the sea people who floated about were attacked by the water. It inflated them so much that they exploded, turning into blood mist. His eyes hardened. He gripped his trident tighter. "Levi, stay back," Percival bellowed, launching himself toward the orc as his leviathan had already closed in. He didn't want to do this, but with no other choice, Percival had to retrieve the leviathan. It narrowly evaded a single blow that caused waves several 100 feet high to burst out of the ocean's surface. "This isn't normal." "It isn't." The orc's deep voice rang as it was already before him, thrusting that same trident toward him. Percival reacted with his own thrust. In this ocean, he had the favor of the spirit, the being that governed the rules of power. It was impossible to lose to. The orc's trident shattered his own and went into his chest. With passive eyes, the orc slowly pushed the trident deeper and deeper until it came out the other side. Blood drifted out. Percival held the trident with wide eyes. He groaned, blood flowing out of his mouth and mixing with the water. With the right relic, even the ocean can be taken from its true owners, the orc thought as it pulled the trident out, then slammed its ironclad boot into Percival's chest. The sound of his ribcage collapsing rang out as shockwaves from the blow billowed outward for kilometers. Percival blasted through the ocean until he slammed into the very rock he once stood on and broke it. His body slowly descended into the dark depths of the ocean, like the end of every other dead creature. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story, and if have any suggestion to a new novel or want next part of any series, comment down. Our target is to get 1K subscriber. There will be SUPRISC for all of you. Stay tuned.